through another microphone. And we're recording.
Oh.
People who may have to miss a class keep abreast of the class if they're so inclined to go to YouTube and watch it. If you ever want to share something that you don't want me to record, I can always pause the recording. Or if you think about it later, you can ask me to edit it, before I post it. All right. All right. So, hello, good evening, and welcome to the first edition at UUCM of Reading the Women of the Bible. And let me begin by sharing some reasons why this course. So I'm always interested in the history of ideas. I'm always interested in why do we believe the stuff that we believe? Where did these foundational assumptions that we've built a lot of things on, whether it's social expectations or the way that we're in relationship or the legal system or just the way we talk to it, whatever it is, I just want to know where it comes from. And when you look at things, especially things that seem to be wrapped up in injustice and inequity, you often learn a whole lot when you try and discover where the ideas for why we do and say the things we do and say originate. And sometimes you can find a culprit, like you can say, this idea comes from this. But more and more, as I do this investigation over my life, and I'm actually involved in reading another very large text right now, The Dawn of Everything, the Graeber and Grinnell.
Is that all? The Dawn of Everything.
That book, reminds us that what we used to imagine was the case for human cultural evolution, what we were taught has no evidence. And it's a story told to prop up something else altogether different. And what a lot of people will assume about women of the Bible actually has nothing to do with the women of the Bible. And this is because, of course, there are a lot of religious systems that, for whatever reason, continue to feel it's necessary to promote a toxic version of patriarchy and male dominance that they say is grounded in Scripture, but it really isn't. It's grounded in a whole lot of other things. And so the first thing we want to do is we want to read this text to liberate in our minds, because I think a lot of these women are already liberated enough in the book, but not all of them, in our minds, these women in the Bible. But first, a story about the woman who wrote this text. She was a professor for a long time at the University of Chicago Divinity School. This text was published in 2007, I believe it was 2007. And it was a class on the first 11 chapters of Genesis. That's all we studied. We studied it in translation. She gave us a sort of speed course in Hebrew for those of us who didn't have Hebrew, which included me. She was also a master of other ancient Near Eastern languages and taught us a lot about where a lot of the stories in Genesis come from and why, even some of the very words were used because they would remind people of that age of lots of different things that we're not aware of today, right? Well, at the time, we didn't know it when the class started. She was dying of cancer. And we came in one day, University of Chicago does trimesters, or at least they did back then. I don't know if they got rid of that system, which means they're 10-week courses instead of 16-week semesters. And let me tell you, they don't make the syllabi any smaller because you only have 10 weeks to read them. So that was not a reality that I experienced at the University of Chicago. And so, we met 2 or 3 times a week in a small office. There was only 6 people in this class with me on the first 11 chapters of Genesis. And we came in one day and there was one of those spider phones. And it looks a little bit like our little disc here. And It was an early version of a teleconferencing device. And she was giving us her lecture from her hospital bed. And we all were sitting there somewhat aghast, like, why are we torturing this poor woman? You know, and we were master's students. So it wasn't like we were trying to skip class and go run around, you know. Yeah, we're like, well, why are we having class? And so one of us contacted her husband, and he thanked us very much for our concern. And he said, please, I think it's the only thing that's keeping her alive. So if you show up and that spider phone's there and you hear her voice, you know, say your prayers, stay engaged, keep her talking, because I know this means so much to her. So she did her last 4 weeks of teaching for us from her hospital bed.
Did she recover?
No, she passed away about a month and a half after our class. And her husband actually invited the class over for dinner after her memorial service, a couple weeks after her memorial service. So that's my story of learning from Tikva Frymer-Kinski. And I actually hadn't read this book before I took her class. And in the meantime, I know that some of our students may be familiar with her text, In the Wake of the Goddesses. And that's where she shares her research into a lot of the spiritual stories and other heroes, especially women heroes in tales from around Israel and before Israel. And it's an amazing foundational text that really sets the stage for the creation of the myths in Genesis. And then, of course, she did this. This book won all kinds of awards, the Jewish Book Award and all kinds of amazing awards this thing ran. All right, so that's my story of Tikva Frymer-Kinski. Remains a giant in my imagination because of that experience. So, you know, the other question I asked, this was similar to when I taught Sisters in the Wilderness last year. I wanted to make sure that, you know, I wasn't just, you know, the straight white guy talking about, you know, identities that I don't really live. I wanted to invite someone, you know, who shares the identity of being a woman. And so I invited Johanna Foster to be my co-teacher. She's not a biblical scholar. She'll tell you more about herself, but she's going to continue to make sure we're having that lens. And she's going to bring her vast experience as being a professor herself into the work that we do together. So I'm going to invite Johanna to share a little bit about herself.
Thanks, Reverend Scott. It's so great to be with all of you. And when Reverend Scott invited me to participate as a co-teacher, and I'd like to see myself as a student resource, I heard the story that you just shared and was deeply moved on many levels, and particularly as a teacher, and could really relate to that story. And so I know most of you, but I don't know if you know that when I'm not at the U, I teach sociology. So I'm a professor of sociology at Monmouth University, and my areas of training are in gender and inequalities, largely speaking. And so, you know, there is so much about what I do that makes me so excited about this class. But Reverend Scott is absolutely right. I am absolutely not a biblical scholar. I have very little familiarity with biblical text. So I am here with all of you as a student, but as someone that has spent, you know, almost 30 years professionally thinking and learning about gender. And so as a sociologist, you know, the way we approach, you know, most issues is looking at the relationship between self and systems. And I think as the course unfolds, we'll learn that that's, you know, a perspective that Frymer-Kinski is asking us to take on the stories. But, you know, we try to impart a sociological imagination, which is looking at the world in ways that helps us understand that the personal is political. So sort of bringing a feminist sensibility to human relationships and social systems. So, you know, we spend a lot of time looking at the ways in which systems are not people, but people are shaped by the systems. And so as a feminist sociologist, and in my work, particularly around looking at gender. So I've studied gender inequalities, but also gender itself, right? And the relationship between gender and gender inequalities. And so I'm really excited to at least be a person in the room that might have been thinking about some of these things that I can help shed some light on. But I do want to share just a bit of my own origin story about how I might have gotten extra excited about the class, and frankly, how I got to the U, just if you allow me, is that prior to taking on sociology, I found my way into feminist studies through an early work on goddess religions and goddess traditions. And so it was as a relatively young person that, I found a history of pre-patriarchy. And at that point I was a young adult and thought, how did I get to, 20 and had not learned any of this world history. And it totally transformed my life and set me on a path that actually got me to gender studies. And then gender studies got me to sociology. So, and that all got me to the U. So I'm really thrilled to kind of, be a wing woman here. And as we read through the stories, and I do ask that when I can be helpful in that way, if there's things that I can share in terms of how the social sciences or feminist studies might want to weigh in, please ask me to comment. But I'm with all of you on the stories I am reading for the first time, actually. So some of you may be well ahead of me on these tales of these amazing.
Did you say the part about how you got to the U? Did you?
So I was really searching for a tradition, a spiritual home that would allow me to incorporate what I really respected about pre-patriarchal traditions, and that would allow me to appreciate the patriarchal traditions with a critical eye. And I think that this perspective helps me there. Yeah.
Awesome. Debbie's searching for one of our other regular classmates, Foxy. Something must have come up for her.
She doesn't have a link. She says, I sent her.
Okay, we'll send it to her again. So I want to make sure that you know that I encourage you to interrupt me often. I can go on.
Okay.
That's right. And if you can think of something foundational that can help us think of gender or some other issue we're bringing up, clearly, we probably can't digest another thick tome, but some kind of essay or something,
sure.
Perfect. That kind of work would be perfect as to add to our class. So thank you for that. All right. So this is the time when we I'm going to talk a little bit about class style and methods. So what I like for our classes, I like us to dig into the text. I like us to use the text. I like us to encounter the text. And then after we've done that discipline, then to see what we have to say about it. I don't want us to just start talking about what this text might be or might show until we've actually gone through, actually spending time with it. And so that's a primary thing for me. That comes from my own educational style and my own education. St. John's College, Annapolis, one place where I study, is famously known as the Great Books Program. And and you read and you try to digest and come up with something to say and learn how to defend what you think against the person across the table. And that's sort of the style. The last class, I actually challenged them to do some writing. I might get so inspired in this, though I don't have anything yet up my sleeve to do that necessarily. We'll talk about some more of the things, but if I find a good video or something, I'll use it. But I think this class isn't going to have as much of that as some of my other classes. I think this class, there's enough of us with managing the Weimer-Ginsky text and the Bible that it makes sense to kind of stay a little more focused. But if you find a great video, send it to me. If I agree, we can try using it. If I find something, I'll keep it short so we don't miss too much other class time. All right, so I'm going to spotlight this for everyone. So make sure, so this is the primary text, as you know, and most of the Bible readings that she refers to, she does park inside the text. So, you know, you could probably get away with not having a study Bible at home or using a free one online. Just make sure you're using a good translation of the free ones online. You know, I usually recommend the NRSV, which is considered the one that most scholars use, New Revised Standard Version. There's actually a new version of the NRSV scheduled to come out in about 10 months. But there are different versions of it. Harper Collins is one that she has. Here you go. Yeah, here's the Harper Collins. This is the New Interpreters. There's an Oxford. Just a good study Bible. Why a study Bible? Oh, because it gives you all these wonderful extra things. You know, all this explanatory material in the beginning, so you can see how the Bible's laid out. Each chapter has its own like outline in this. Each book of the Bible will have an outline that helps you understand how that book might be put together, which is a nice way to get, if you think structurally, it's really helpful tool that way. There's often like an extended essay about a particular issue in the middle of the text for those of you who just can't get enough to read. And of course, the study Bibles, the New Interpreters, and all of them have these lovely maps in the back. So if you want to get a sense of the landscape of the stories, you know, these different maps are done by date, and it really helps you situate the story you're reading in the specificity. And of course, the more that you learn about, you know, especially the Hebrew Bible, you know, place is really, really important. So that's why a study Bible, and the study Bible also has lots of lovely notes at the bottom of each page that talk about the concepts and the words that are used in the text on those pages. So, you know, that's helpful when you read, when you give yourself enough time to read and you encounter a word or a phrase you don't understand. Often you're going to find it explained right there at the bottom of the page without having to go to your computer. So that's why study Bible, these things cost what, about $35 roughly, something like that. And so it's a good thing to have on your shelf. And then all your evangelical friends can be like, oh my gosh, you have a Bible on the shelf. That's probably the most fun. All right, so let me share this into the chat. This is what we're going to do next. I'm going to invite you all to answer the questions that are in the chat, and I'll say them out loud and I'll model them first, because not everyone here in the room can actually read what's in the chat. So because it's really tiny up on the screen. So just name, pronouns, one thing we should know about you, why did you sign up for this class, and what do you hope to cover or discover in this class? All right, so Reverend Scott, he, him, his. One thing you should know about me is I am gifted in volumes, but I'm also a very good listener. So it goes both ways with me. I'm very audio. I'm not visual. I will almost never see you. What do I hope to cover? I hope to cover what you guys want to cover, and I hope that we discover a way to love this book a little more than maybe we did when we came in today. All right, who wants to go next?
Sure, I think I might need to see the questions
Name
again. Okay,
pronouns.
Johanna Foster, she, her, hers.
Yeah.
One thing that you should know about me, is that right?
Yes.
One thing that you should know about me is that I really love coming up with schema, right, to help understand lots of ideas. I like to put things, right, you know, into you know, thematics. One thing you might not, right, have guessed about me.
Yeah.
One thing you may not have guessed about me is that I just got a pandemic puppy who is 9 months old and already 120 pounds. And what's the other question? What I hope to get out. Yeah, you know, what I hope to get out of is, for myself, I hope to get out a greater literacy of, you know, right, you know, a tradition and that is just so fundamental, you know, to so many around the world that I feel like I don't know enough about, and I also hope to be able to share with folks what I have been, as I said, spending a lot of time in a way that may connect and help others.
Awesome.
So,
Cool. Thank you. All right. You want to go next, Deb?
Sure. Debbie or Debbie, she or hers. You know about me, I'm energetic, even if I don't show it. And I just like to learn more about the Bible, that's all.
Cool.
Beautiful teacher.
I did not pay her to say that. Debbie Ann helps with tech as well, so that's why she's often sitting right here next to
me.
Keep me from messing up too much. Yeah. All right, who wants to go next? Go ahead, Sue. Put your name and pronouns.
Okay, yeah. Susan Spaniard. What? She, her, hers?
Yes. What should we know about you, Sue?
Well, I've been married for 56 years.
Cool.
To the same person.
Mazel tov.
And only once.
Good.
And
what do you want to get out of the class?
well, I'd like to learn more about women in the Bible, because it's something I had never even thought of until you did a sermon about.
Oh yeah. I did the Women Justice Warriors back in October.
Yeah. So,
nice.
and that piqued my interest in taking the class.
See, that's great. Thank you, Sue. Welcome. Why don't you go ahead, Nicole, and then I'll call on everyone that's digital.
Yes.
One at a time.
Nicole Gray, she, her, hers. One thing you should know about me is that I have taken all of the classes that Reverend Scott has taught for RE. And right now, even though I'm completely bogged down with stuff, I still look forward to Thursday nights. Let's see. Something that you may not know about me is this is the very first time that I'm using Kindle ever. Yeah, and it finally worked, except I can't figure out the page numbers, but we'll deal with that later.
Yeah.
It's tricky. I'll have to look at it.
The thing that excites me about this class is the idea of narrative. We've done so many different approaches in Reverend Scott's RE classes, but I like the idea of storytelling. And then when you combine that with women, and then now we have Johanna here, so we have the social scientist piece. I'm super excited to combine that and just to soak it all in.
Welcome, Nicole. Helen Lipman, you're next.
Okay, so my name is Helen Lipman. My pronouns are she, her, hers. So one thing you should know about me is I was raised with Jewish heritage, but my parents were atheist communists, and I've gradually become at least more spiritual and believe in sort of this, whatever, if it's the spirit of life, it's actually the life force. And so one thing you might not know about me is that kayaking is my favorite activity of everything in the world. And why am I taking this class? Well, I know nothing about the Bible. I read the little golden Bible as a kid. That was it. I mean, I know some of these stories, but I wasn't sure how I would like it, to be honest. I ordered not just now. I think, Rev Scott, I've heard you talk about some stuff, and I know you're great at this, but I wasn't sure I'd be interested in the reading. But I just got the books yesterday, and I sat down today and read the whole assigned portion, and it's very, very readable. So I'm really excited about that. And here we are. I don't know if there was anything else. What do I want to get out of it? I want to learn. This is my sort of year for trying new things and jumping into things. So I'm going to learn something that I don't know about. So that's it.
Thank you. Dr. Mary Jones.
That would help. Mary Jones, she, her, hers. What I was in the middle of another book, which was very similar to this. It was called, I'm doing this with my eyes. Please forgive me. The Midrash, a woman is a Midrash, a woman is Midrash, something like that, by a Wilder Gaffney. And I wanted to see how close this was. I was really surprised when this came up. Women of the Bible is the subject of this class. And the other one is flooring me. And I just have to, where were all these people? Like you, Joanna, when I was doing my dissertation.
Awesome.
This is killing me because that was what I wanted to do, but I lost my advisors. I was going into therapy. My shrink became my advisor. It was because I was something in this, but I was comparing women with animals. The cruelty. And again, like I said, where was everybody been? So at least now I'll get it right.
And there's always the next dissertation, right? All right, well, thanks, Mary. All right, Foxy, your turn.
I'm Reverend Foxy Pullen, and from Columbus, Ohio. She, her, hers. Something you probably know about me is that I was raised Methodist and I'm a practicing Druid and elder of Three Fires Grove. What you probably don't know about me is that I spent 20 years as a practicing Jew, have nearly finished bachelor's degrees in both anthropology, indigenous religions, and comparative religion, indigenous religions. But so I have a huge background in the academic form. I've read a similar book. I'm not sure it isn't the same book, but it's a different color. Unfortunately, I gave it away, so I can't use it in this. Reading online is giving me a headache. What I'm hoping for this is that I can fill in some of the blanks for things that might not easily translate from Jewish history, rather than people going, I don't understand that. Like for instance, when Rebekah came out to Abraham's servant at the well, he knew immediately she was a maiden. Why? Because of her hairstyle. Just like with some Native American tribes, your hairstyle dictates your marital status.
Awesome. Thank you. Wow, we got quite a collection of scholars. Two more left. Wendy Mcneil.
Hi, everybody. I think the next time I'll come to your class. I wasn't aware that it was both in person and out. So my name is Wendy Mcneil and my pronouns are she, her. One thing you don't know about me is I was born and raised a Catholic because my mother, years before I was born, converted to Catholicism. It was a very devout Catholic. So as we all know, Roman Catholics don't read the Bible. And so, which is true, that's a joke, but it's absolutely true. And so it was when I got into college and I did my undergraduate work at NYU and made the decision to not pursue law, pre-law I was, but to become an art historian. Then all of the iconography was based on the Bible, especially medieval and Renaissance art. And so I therefore had to get really into it and got, and took, the last class I took about women in the Bible was when I was an undergraduate and I took a class on women in religion. and which was really quite fascinating. And we read When God Was a Woman. That was one of the many texts. The professor was crazy. She had like about 10 books for us to read. It was insane. And so that's one thing to know about me. So I was raised Roman Catholic. And once I started reading the Bible, I became like all converts. I just became obsessed with it. And why did you sign up with this class? Because you can always learn more.
Welcome, Wendy.
Thank you.
And Wallace.
Okay, hi, I'm Wallace. Pronouns are she, her, hers. One thing you should know about me is that I actually volunteer in the tech booth with Debbie Ann, so that's fun. One thing you may not have guessed, my mom was raised Catholic, my dad was raised Jewish, and they raised me with no religion at all. So I never thought in a million years I'd be at a Bible study. So this is new for me. Why did I sign up? Because Reverend Scott always talks about interesting things, so I thought it'd be interesting. And what do I hope to discover? Anything. Like I said, I've never done this before, so thought it'd be a new, interesting thing. And I think someone else said we should always be learning, so we should always be learning.
May it be so. Welcome, Wallace. All right. Well, here we are in this class together, whether we're here in person or virtually. I'm going to screen share real quick so you can see some of the objectives that we've come up with for the course. I usually share all of my notes, whatever I put on the screen, as well as any of my notes, I'll send out an email after the class. And so our objectives are to look at the history of ideas. I mentioned that a little bit in the opening. It's always important to try and understand where the ideas underlying our culture come from. Reclaiming a Bible, that is a long-term project of mine. It's why I teach so many Bible study classes, because I believe those who are telling us that they are the true Christians actually have the most wrong-headed notion of the Bible. So I don't want to let the book be occupied by those who frankly don't understand it. Yes, and I can say that. I guess I can. I just did. And that includes, sort of dispelling the wrong-headed notions of what the Bible says. Another objective is just to remind us that the Bible is a primary cultural document. Can you really consider yourself, as educated as you could be until you know what to do with it? So let's have an informed engagement. So we can have a part of the conversation about what it is and what it does and what it can be, because nothing is as draining of our power if someone challenges us and says they're challenging us from a biblical perspective, and the only response we have is, well, I don't know it. I can't have a conversation with you about this because I haven't, So because I believe, used rightly, the Bible is a tool of liberation. Part of what we're going to be doing in this class, and I'm sure that Johanna has some experience in this, is reading scripture like any text against the grain. So a lot of people think what this text is. We're going to read against that. We're going to go against what the received tradition in our culture tells us we're supposed to believe about women, what we're supposed to believe about the Bible. We hopefully are grounding this work in the larger movement for gender equity. Now, of course, the Bible, as far as I've encountered, it really doesn't speak about gender fluidity much. There may be one or two cases where someone may dress, like someone of another gender, but really the Bible is a gender binary text. There's men and women. Linguistically, in some of the ancient languages, some of those ancient languages have three genders. They actually have the neutral. And when you do translations and you look at how the Bible's written, sometimes the word for God or Holy Spirit, for instance, is famously a female gendered noun. The Father is actually a neutral noun, believe it or not. So there's all kinds of interesting ways that we have put layers of gender on top of biblical concepts in ways that are not correct. Equipping ourselves to, well, I mentioned this one, equipping ourselves to intelligently defend our beliefs and to show others there's a more just way to understand the Bible. We're going to uncover why these texts are so relevant to us today, hopefully, and hopefully we'll have some fun bonding and relationship building in the process. What we won't cover, you may think this is odd, but there's a good reason for this. We're not going to cover Eve and Mary. The main reason is they're such large figures packed with so many things that we may not be able to do them justice. And Farmer Kinski herself does not encounter them in this text. There's plenty of other folks to talk about. I'm going to encourage you all to find a study partner or two to bounce ideas off of between weeks. So I will give you a chance to do that. You can do that over email, or if you don't know, if you want to send me a special message and I'll try and team you up with someone. I want you to come to class, even if you're not prepared. So if you're not prepared, come anyway, just let others lead the conversation until we get somewhere beyond the text, and it's fine. I'm not, bring a friend, folks can join at any time, and just a reminder that we will record our classes. All right, I'm going to take this down and see if you all have any questions about those. And like I said, I will send you all this stuff to you via email. I don't expect you to remember it all. You all good with everything I presented out there? No questions? That's good. Okay.
Can I just say something? Because you said something for 18 years. Actually, it was probably longer than that. I was a member of Union Congregational Church, and the minister there was Reverend Stephanie Weiner, Reverend Dr. Stephanie Weiner, who I thought was absolutely brilliant. And she was also a very, very, very good pastor. And the one thing that she said is that you can't argue with the other side if you don't know the text. You must know the text. And one of the things that I did it was 15 years because they celebrated it. On Monday mornings from 9 to 11, I would join Stephanie's Bible study class. So, and because of that, you have to know the text if you want to talk to some people about the other side, especially. So thank you for that, Reverend Scott.
Sure. So we're going to do a little something tonight that isn't, we won't do this every week, but, we're going to focus a lot on the introduction to the book. And because the introduction, I think, masterfully lays out what her project is. And we're going to read a little more together than I would normally do in a class because it's just there. I mean, if you want to, anyone wants to know what we're doing and why, it's kind of left, it's all here. So I'm going to start on, it's the introduction, which is page 13, XIII. So it's Roman numeral 13. It's Introduction Reading the Women of the Bible. All right. And I would love to have other folks take a paragraph here or there. So we're not going to read the entire thing together, but a bit. So just, follow along and listen. I think, some folks learn better differently. I tend to learn best by hearing and watching the words fly by. The women of ancient Israel have carved a place for themselves in our consciousness. Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah are the mothers of Israel. The biblical Eve is our mother in myth, now joined by mitochondrial Eve as our mother in genes. Bathsheba and Delilah, their very names conjure up scenes in our imagination, nights of ancient sex and betrayal. Children walk around today bearing the names of Miriam and Deborah, ancient leaders, poets, and prophets, and the names of Abigail, Gail, Ruth, Naomi, and Esther, heroines and queens of the Hebrew Bible. faced with the memory of so many prominent women, a visitor from a distant planet might justifiably conclude that ancient Israel was a feminist paradise. But the visitor would be wrong. Ancient Israel, like all other great historical civilizations, was a patriarchy. Men owned almost all the land, which was passed on from father to son. The legal tribunals consisted of men. Judges at the central courts and elders in the local councils were men. The army was composed of men, as was the administrative bureaucracy. Men also dominated public religious life, serving as officiants in local and national rituals and holding all the positions in the temple hierarchy. Women, while not physically confined to the home, expended most of their energies there. Economically dependent on the head of their households, they had a limited ability to determine events beyond their own families, and even within the family, they ultimately had to conform to the wishes of the father or husband. Johanna, would you like to share that?
Our visitor from a distant planet might not be troubled by this discovery, but readers with the late 20th century are often startled. The Bible, after all, has informed and continues to inform much of our own moral thinking. How can a book that teaches the common divine origin of all humanity and the sacred nature of each human being reflect a social order in which women are systematically disadvantaged and subordinated? This question creates a whole range of answers among contemporary readers. At one end of the spectrum is the leadership of the Southern Baptists, who embrace the biblical system and mandate that today's women suppress their demand for equality and be subordinate to their husbands. Other readers at the opposite pole of the spectrum find the patriarchy of the Bible a reason to abandon the monotheist religions based on it. They suspect that the Bible itself led to patriarchy. These readers argue that since Israel had only one God, and this God is referred to as he, this male Lord provides a divine model for males as master. After all, as Mary Daly, there we go, said concerning contemporary religion, if God is a man, then man is God. Monotheism then, according to this argument, created patriarchy.
I'll pick it up because I'm going to cut this up a little. Like the visitor from a distant planet, these 20th century theorists are drawing logical conclusions, but they're simply wrong. She's rather bold, is she not? History shows that patriarchy was well entrenched 1,500 years before Israel first came into being. As we trace our written records from the beginning of writing in ancient Sumer through the ensuing centuries and millennia in the ancient world, we can trace the intensification of patriarchy as time goes on. But even the first written records reflect a social system in which males were predominant. Male-dominated social systems were very widespread, encompassing geographically distant societies with different religions and socio-political systems. Biblical Israel did not invent patriarchy. It was not even the most intense or thorough patriarchy in the ancient world. Other classical societies like Assyria and Athens show a much greater degree of a domination of women, and I would add Rome even more so. The worship of Ishtar in Assyria and Athena in Athens did not lessen male control over real women. The male lord did not create patriarchy. The truth is just the opposite. Patriarchal thought required that the one Lord of all be conceived as a male and portrayed in a masculine grammar. So here we have her assertion that the reason that the God that we find in the Bible may suggest and promote a patriarchy is because of the men who wrote it. So to quote others, including Mircea Eliade and other famous broad religious thinkers, you know, God created human beings and then human beings created God. And that's what she's saying, is that, you know, they were reflecting the society in which they were born. All right. All right, so it's important to get the facts straight. The patriarchy pre-existed the Bible. The Bible was not written to construct it. Readers can accept the Bible's moral stature without conforming to the patriarchal social structure within it. And at the same time, there's no ignoring the fact that even though the Bible did not create patriarchy, it also did not eliminate it. The Bible did not question the patriarchal and the social structure it shared with the rest of the ancient world, just as it did not question another glaring social inequity, slavery. Biblical thinkers, so radical in their transformation of ideas about God and about the relationship of humanity to the cosmos, never conceived of a radical transformation of society. They were very aware of social problems, but they did not do what we maybe thought they should. And then she counters on the next page, the Bible does not, however, defend the status quo, because the idea of social revolution is integral to biblical thought. You've heard me preach about this in especially the prophets, Isaiah particularly. God is a God of change, for God elevates the lowly, brings the marginalized to the center, and raises high the socially inferior. In this way, power and privilege are necessarily impermanent. But reversing position does not create a more egalitarian world any more than ameliorating suffering does. It only changes the fortunes of individual people. Biblical thinkers never conceived of a social order without hierarchy. So there's a lot there, and I don't want to drown us in all this. I'm going to just share this. Well, first I'm going to stop there. There's another piece in there I want us to read because I think it's important, and then we'll go from there. So, what do you think about what we just read, what we just heard? Do you buy it? Is it apologetics to the nth degree? Let me know what you think.
So I don't know yet. I'm reserving judgment because this is all new to me. I can't, I mean, I know that there's been patriarchy always, and it's not surprising that this reflects it. I don't believe the people who wrote the Bible, I don't believe their writing caused it, I guess. I think she makes a good point. And apparently some of the women have done a lot of great things, and as we get through that, but so the part I just read up to whatever page 40 something, they were talking about women learned to use their wiles in ways that they had to, subterfuge and stuff, to get their often important things and needs met for them, for their family, their children. So I actually know people who have done that, most of their adult lives. I know women, I'm thinking one in particular who's oh, well, I don't tell my husband this because he would have a fit about that kind of thing. And I'm like, so I don't know how much has changed, unfortunately. And that's a good point about changing individual lives, but not changing the structure. But changing the structure is just unbelievably difficult. And it takes, here we are, in 2022, and, we have many of the same things. Just take a look at Congress and, all the white men. And so anyway, that's it. That's enough.
Sure. All right. Let's continue with a little more of this.
You know what, Reverend Scott, just that I found that really confusing, I marked that page up. I don't know if you can see, I've written all over here because I just found that to be really confusing. And in part because I think that where we see the uproar of society or and I could be totally wrong here, of trying to transform the social systems is more in the Christian Bible than in the Hebrew Bible. In the Hebrew Bible, it seems to be more of doing exactly what she's saying, but in the Gospels and and those and the letters, it seems to be more of more revolutionary thought. But I could be, that's,
I would put it to you this way, that the history of the Hebrew Bible, as it is, as we understand the history of the culture and politics of ancient Israel, is a very interesting social leadership structure. At least we know that pre-exile Judaism in ancient Israel, kings were expected to have a court, at their court, prophets, sometimes as many as 100 or 200. That's where folks like Jeremiah, Isaiah, Amos come from. Almost all the prophets we know in the Hebrew scriptures were kind of official prophets who were kept at the discretion and the financial support of the king, and were expected to be reflecting back to the king how the king was doing. And the ones we know about are the ones that people realized were closer to the truth. And so, like, the reason we know about Isaiah, number one, his book is very long. It's actually probably 3 different authors in that text. But the important thing is, Isaiah is talking about a reordering of society. The books of the Hebrew prophets are much more about systemic change of the social order than anything else in biblical literature. And where the Christian scriptures sound like that, like they're agreeing with that, especially with the words of Jesus, is when they are quoting and referring to the Hebrew prophets. Jesus quotes Isaiah more than any other book of the Bible. So a lot of what we hear about the lion shall come before the lamb and all that, Jesus says that, but Isaiah had said it before. So that's we'll touch back on that. We'll go back and forth on this. And Foxy, you have something to say?
Yeah, we have to remember too that the Bible was codified during Roman rule. And if we're going to go back and look at the patriarchy levels of the societies of that time frame, Rome takes the cake. A woman could not leave her house without a male escort.
Right. Yeah, all that stuff. Rome was probably the most misogynistic major civilization that we have record of. That's correct. Yep. And if you look at the structure of the Catholic Church, it was simply an echo of the structure of the Roman Empire, right? You know, so it's very tied together. All right, let's do a little bit more primer Kinski here, and then we'll have lots more to say. Excuse me. Absent-minded professor dropping things all over the.
Hey now. Hey.
So this is again on page XD, so 15, Roman numeral 15. Halfway down in the last paragraph. Contrary to all assumptions, my own included, says Primer Kinski, the Hebrew Bible, unlike other ancient literature, does not present any ideas about women as the other. The role of women is clearly subordinate, but the Hebrew Bible does not explain or justify this subordination by portraying women as different or inferior. The stories do not reflect any differences in goals and desires between men and women, nor do they point out any strategies or methods used by women that are different from those used by men who are not in positions of authority. There are no personality traits or psychological characteristics that are unique to women, and the familiar Western notions of feminine wiles, the battle between the sexes, sister solidarity, sex as a weapon, and they are all absent in Primer Kinski's reading, as are any discussion of the nature of women. There are also no negative statements and stereotypes about women, no gynophobic discourse or women-fearing discourse. The only misogynist statement in the Bible comes very late in biblical development in the book of Ecclesiastes and shows the introduction of classical Greek denigration of women into Israeli thought. The Bible's lack of ideas about female otherness does not make it a feminist paradise any more than the presence of memorable women does. And women were still socially disadvantaged and excluded from public power. But the Bible does not add insult to this disadvantage, does not claim that women need to be controlled because they are wild, or need to be led because they are foolish, or need to be directed because they are passive, or any other justifications for male domination that have been prevalent in Western culture. That's all I believe we need to read about that. And that sort of lays down her thinking about what we're about to read. And so we can see if we agree but I think the fact that that's where she is, I think for people like us, makes us more likely to want to keep reading. So hopefully that's the case. So now we're going to look at some of the text itself and the very first section of this text. The very first section of this text is known as Victors. It's part 1. I'm assuming it's page 1 or some such. Yes, and she starts out with the story of Rebekah. And why Rivka? Because a lot of the matriarchs of Israel have Hebrew names as well as other names. In fact, some of their names get changed once they accept their mission to be part of forming this new nation, this new religion. Like Sarah's original name is Sarai. Rivka, I believe, is simply the Hebrew name for Rebekah. We know that Abraham's name before he accepts God's mission is Abram. So the renaming is a significant part of an outward proclamation that we've accepted the mission. Jacob becomes Israel, for instance. There's a lot of this that happens throughout the Bible, but it especially happens a lot in Genesis. So before we jump into Rebekah's story specifically, one of the things to remember about Genesis is a text that has 2 creation stories in the beginning. There's in the beginning, there was chaos and, this whole bit, right? And that's number 1. And then the second creation story of Adam and Eve. There's 2 different creation stories that have 2 different ramifications if you follow their logic. We're not getting deeply into the creation stories in this class, but it's an important thing to remember that any single book of the Bible is a collection itself. So Genesis is not just one book. It's one book that maybe one person edited, but most of these stories had been spoken and shared, aloud around campfires for hundreds of years, if not longer, before anyone thought about writing them down. And then they got written down, and then someone said, we need to collect all these because we're putting this book together, right? And so the generation of scripture is ancient. It's much more ancient than the first written version. And Genesis especially collects a lot of the folk tales that people would have known all around the biblical world, because to tell this story without those folk tales, people would have wondered, well, where's Rebekah? And where's Deborah? And where's the story of the flood? You had to include these things because people had known about them for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And then the final versions of the Bible that we end up with, besides coming to us through translation, they had editors who had their own agenda. There's at least 4 editors that you can identify with textual analysis of the Hebrew scriptures, at least 4. I'm not going to go into all that. It's interesting. It's fruitful for a different kind of discussion, but different parts of the same book, sometimes different parts of the same chapter, are edited by different groups of people. And this is why sometimes when we read, the ancient biblical literature, it seems like it jumps around a bit, because it is. That they had to do their best to include the stories people expected to hear while telling their own story that was serving all kinds of other purposes, institutional, political, cultic, meaning like, how are we going to worship? What does it mean for us to be a people? What is our story? How do we tell it? So all that being said.
Oh, Rip Scott, I'm going to interrupt. I'm going to exercise. I'm exercising my interrupter duty. So knowing that, we're there's patriarchies, and I'm going to say that, you know, intentionally as plural,
Yes.
and the span of time, right, that this editorships, and knowing you don't want to, right, this is not for a for much longer. But I'm curious, has there been revelations, no pun intended, that there have been women that were among the editors, or in terms of like knowing the context, but that might have had some role, if however had to be underground or, you know, not recognized? I mean, is there a short answer to that? Or?
The short answer to that is we don't know. Some, and I believe some of Frymer-Kinski's scholarship might suggest it, though she doesn't really say it as far as I'm able to put my finger on it. You know, especially before the religion of ancient Israel becomes institutionalized, you know, women were also around those campfires hearing the stories, and most likely were helping to tell them. It's later on when it becomes a socio-political structure and it starts to get written down. We have no evidence of female authorship in most of the Bible. There are some claims that, you know, like the book of Ruth, and maybe some other books with the woman's title, you know, could have been composed originally by a woman, even if a man wrote it down for the first time. But there's no, you know, lack of evidence is not proof.
No.
But right. So, but we don't have that evidence, except for where, you know, you can read some things and you'll feel like it doesn't seem like a man wrote this one. You know what I mean? The story of Naomi and Ruth, it almost seems like a man could not have written that, right? I mean, a lot of those stories, yeah.
Yep.
Outside of the textual evidence, there's not much else. So she starts with Rebekah, which is a fascinating and powerful way to start. Because one of the first things, what's the first thing we learn about Rebekah in the Frymer-Kinski text? One of the first things that we learn about Rebekah. She's the first person, she's the first woman in the Bible to what?
Whose birth was recorded.
Yes, her birth is recorded. No other woman in the Bible is, you know all the begats and all this stuff. Rebekah is the only female who's listed in those lists of the begats. And this is on the Frymer-Kinski book, page 5. It's from Genesis 22:20. It happened after these matters. Thus was told to Abraham, look, Milcah has borne sons to Nahor, your brother. Utz's firstborn, Buz his brother, Kemuel the father of Aram, and Keshed, and Hazo, and Pildash, and Yidlaf, and Bethuel. Bethuel gave birth to Rivkah. That's Rebekah. No other woman is listed in these lists like this in the Bible. So one of the things that we learn when we do textual analysis is if this is the only person that's something like that is, we should pay attention to them, right? You know, so there's something about Rebekah here, and Rebekah ends up having a lot of power. One thing I would ask you to pay attention to when you read or review this section, she does a great job of what's called exegesis, or trying to understand things from the text. So if you look on page 6, she'll unpack the passage that we just read line by line to help construct the concrete actual text that's there, and then we can figure out what to do with it. And it's a classic form of biblical scholarship. So that's why she says, a new matter's beginning. It happened after these matters. The narrator lists Nahor's descendants. And then the form is typical for genealogies, except after listing because Milcah's sons, before stating there were 8 sons, she jumps to the next generation to include the son's daughter. Is important. So what happens right before this is Isaac has been saved. If you recall the classic text in Genesis, where for some reason Yahweh tells Abraham to sacrifice his one and only son with Sarah, a son that he waited for almost 100 years. You can imagine that, giving birth at age 95, as Sarah does, apparently in the Bible. And for some reason, Abraham is asked to sacrifice his son. And we could spend a whole lot of time on that, and I won't. A lot of people like to claim that that's simply a demand for obedience. Others, including Kierkegaard and others, suggest he was testing how reasonable Abraham was, and Abraham did not pass. It was a request that should have been resisted, is what Kierkegaard says. Anyway, so this is, Isaac is Abraham's son, and we've just heard about Rebekah, and Rebekah or Rivkah is the one who will marry Isaac. That's how the stories are coming together here in Genesis 22. All right, I'm going to go to the bottom of page 6 and just read the biblical text again. Rivkah's destiny comes into closer view when Abraham is ready to find a wife for his son. Abraham was old, advanced in years, and he said to his servant, put your hand under my thigh. This apparently was a sign of great trust. And I will adjure you by Yahweh, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you shall not take any wife from my son, from the daughters of the Canaanite in whose midst I'm living. Rather, you should go to my land, my homeland, and take a wife for my son Isaac. And then the servant is all worried that this woman won't come with this stranger back to another strange land. Perhaps the woman will not be willing to come after me to this land. Should I bring your son back to the land from which you come? Be careful not to return my son to there. So he, for whatever reason, Abraham has really bought into this notion that where he is in Canaan, in ancient Israel, is a place that is promised to him and his people. And that's, he doesn't want to leave it. To leave it, to send your son away, leaves the heir somewhere else. And so the servant agrees to do this. And so Abraham, who's too old to go for himself, he sends this chief person. And if the girl won't come, then the servant, is discharged from his oath. But we'll see what happens. And this is very bizarre in my recollection. The servant took 10 of his master's camels and went with all the bounty of his master in his hand. So he has gifts. He arose and went to Aram Naharaim, to the city of Nahor. He parked his camels outside the town at a well toward evening, at the time that the girls who draw water come out. There's a lot of gathering of women around wells in this part of the Bible. If you want to find a maiden, you go find a well. Apparently, it's what you did in the old days. He said, Yahweh, God of my ancestor, make it happen for me today and act benevolently with my master Abraham. Look, I'm standing by the water spring, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming out to draw water. Let it be that the girl to whom I say, incline your drug to me that I may drink, and she says, drink, and I will also water your camels. Her you will have brought for your servant Isaac, and through her I will know that you have acted benevolently with my master. So the servant is asking for a really easy work day. He doesn't want to work too hard to find this woman. So the first person I say this to, God, just make her be the one, because I don't feel like trying to figure this out. And so he's, he's looking for a sign, right? It's all this, show me a sign. It's throughout biblical literature. And it happened before he finished speaking. Look, Rivkah is coming out. She who was born to Bethuel, son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, brother of Abraham. And her jug was on her shoulder. She was very beautiful. Of course she was very beautiful. A young maiden whom no man had known. And as Foxy told us, that conclusion could be made from hairstyle and or clothing, as was the custom of the people for maidens. The servant ran toward her and said, draw for me, please, a little water from your jug. She said, drink, my lord, and hurried to lower her jug to her hand and gave him drink. She finished giving him drink and said, for your camels also I will draw water until they have finished drinking. The girl hurried and emptied her jug into the trough and ran again to the well. The man, astonished, was keeping quiet to know if Yahweh had made him succeed or not. And it happened that when the camels finished drinking, the man took a gold nose ring whose weight was half shekel and 2 bracelets in her arm, 10 shekels her weight. He said, whose daughter are you? Tell me, please. He finds out that she's the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah. There we go. And they're invited to spend the night in the hospitality custom that is part of that culture. Yes, rather convenient that the first person that he spies happens to be the one. It could just be dramatic economy, because there's lots of stories to tell. In Genesis, they give only the necessary details and what they think are the necessary details. And we're going to skip ahead to page 10. And the girl ran home and told her mother's house about these matters. And Rebekah had a brother named Laban. And Laban ran outside to the spring. It happened that when he saw the nose ring and the bracelets on the sister's arm, and when he heard the words of the sister, thus the man said, he came to the man, and look, he was standing with the camels. Blessed be Yahweh. Why do you stand outside? And I have cleared the house of the place for the camels. So this is an overly hospitable gesture. The man comes to the house, settles the camels, etc. Food is placed before him. And I won't speak until I've spoken my matter. Maybe he was afraid he'd have too much wine. I don't know. But I need to tell you why I'm here before we start hanging out and partying, right? I'm the servant of Abraham. Yahweh blessed my Lord greatly, and he grew great, gave him many sheep, cattle, silver, and gold, and servants and camels, etc. Sarah, my Lord's wife, bore a son after she had grown. And my Lord adjured me thus, you shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanite. You must go to my father's house and take a wife for my son. So yes, this is the same area where Abraham's family comes from. It's the same place where Sarah, Abraham's wife, comes from. There is a lot of this connectivity to places. There's a lot of foundational emphasis on blood relations, of staying within a family. That is very problematic theologically. I talked about that last weekend in the service. And so, in the end, the matter is from Yahweh. We cannot say to you bad or good. This is page 11. Rivkah is before you. Take her and go and let her be a wife to you, Lord's son, as Yahweh has spoken. I don't remember them asking what Rebekah wanted to do. Do we see any of that in here? No. So why is Rebekah the hand that rocks the cradle? Why is she a victor? Well, we need to know where she comes from and what her upbringing was like before we can understand how what she does later in life really is powerful and really upsets the power structure. I'm going to stop there until we can go to a little bit more. Any questions or observations about this?
Yeah.
So
I'm getting my books confused, which I knew I would do. But the fact that she is marrying her grandmother's cousin kind of throws me off a bit. Is this just in their family, or is this something that happened in, because I mean, Abraham and Sarah were half brother and sister.
Right.
And the other brother of them had a daughter who was married to the other brother of them. And this is coming down to Sarah, to Rebekah. So that's her line. That was her grandmother. So it's like this inbreeding is like, is it just to that family?
Stop and think about Egyptian culture.
Yeah.
The pharaoh always married his sister. Not necessarily a full sister, but the pharaoh always married his sister. And you find similar things in other parts of Mesopotamia. On the flip side of that argument, though, that is a fourth degree relationship between Rivkah and Isaac. Mm-hmm. So genetically speaking, it's safe. Yeah. The odds are very small that there would be a genetic offshoot that was a problem.
That came up when the daughter married and half brother married half sister.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just, is this?
Yeah, it was very common at the time. You want to marry somebody that you know.
It seems that this is, it seems as though stories are written, not that God said, but stories are written to validate what these men wanted to do.
Of course they are.
All right. You get the gold star today, Mary. That's great.
Of course they are.
Yeah. And it also explains, I think, why there's always these fertility issues. You know, that why Sarah had to go out to Hagar, right? That's the story. Is Hagar, where does Hagar? Hagar comes in with Sarah, right? So she had to go to get somebody who is not related to them at all in order to get Abraham to have a child. Otherwise, because there's such relationship, blood relationships, that of course it would make it difficult for them to have children with each other.
It also seems that they're trying to have these things are being validated so men can have sex with anybody they want.
Especially
at any time. And like I said, I may be mixing the two books at this point, which I know I am, but my head is just rolling with all this information.
Yeah.
Well, and I also think, Foxy, your point about, you know, it's common, but historically, you know, the management, which, you know, the theme is raised here in terms of managing the boundaries, not just individually for families, but in terms of nation building, wealth accumulation, however modest that wealth would be. So, and not disconnected, right, from individual men's interests, but men, right, as part of, you know, particular patriarchy in that in-group, out-group, you know, so, and I don't want to get too far ahead of what you might want to say, but, you know, just the, you know, Rebekah as, you know, the symbol of, right, you know, the nation and sort of, right, the matriarch, and so that, you know, the usefulness of her story in that way, right, for men of the group to mark this sort of merger, right, or, you know, the lines, right, the double, right, the double hit of both lines there. You know?
Yeah.
No, that's true.
And it still goes on where you have Philip marrying Elizabeth, right? If you look at the British monarchy, they're first cousins.
Yeah. So this was about inheritance. This was about wealth. This was about economic power. We don't have much evidence of what average folk did. Most scholars think that unless you were really stuck in the middle of nowhere and you didn't get around, you didn't travel much, and nobody came to your town, you know, most people did not marry that close to the family. This is about powerful families keeping the power in the family. Mm-hmm. And when you tie that to geological location, and you tie that to a belief in bloodlines, it is not something that they're willing to transgress. So there's another thing that happens here too. You know, Abraham marrying his half sister here, and they're both from the same part of the world. Isaac marrying someone that he's closely related to. Jacob, who becomes Israel. We're about to read Jacob's story here. He goes back to the same part of the world to get his wife, and the little games played on him that he didn't see coming. We'll get into that, but basically he wants to marry the younger, but he can't. He has to. The oldest has to be married off first, so he agrees to stay there, and he comes home with two wives, but it takes him about 14 years to come home. That we'll get into that story next week. But let's go back and finish up this story, because this is where Rebekah exercises her power. I wanted to get us to her, and then here's her power. So this is pages 16 and 17 of the Primer Kinsey text. When he took the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean from Padan Aram, And Isaac entreated Yahweh in the presence of his wife, for she was infertile. Yahweh was successfully entreated by him, and Rivkah became pregnant. Inside her, the children moved around tumultuously. Children. This is the way it is. What do I need this? What do I need this for? She went to inquire of Yahweh. Two peoples are in your belly. Two nations from your loins will divide. Nation over nation will be strong, and the older, the younger will work. So the younger will work the older. We'll find out what that means in a minute. Her days till birth were complete, and look, there were twins. First one came out red, and all of him like a mantle of hair, and they called his name Esau. After his brother came out, his hand holding Esau's heel, literally grabbing on to the one who's supposed to be the heir, not letting him get too far away, grabbing his heel as he comes out of the womb. They called him Jacob. But Isaac was 60 years old when she gave birth to them. So here we go. Lots of symbolism in this. And let's just go to Rivka's plan on the next page.
Well, could I just say something about this? What really struck me was the fact that she went to inquire of Yahweh, and Yahweh said to her, she is speaking to God.
Hagar
and that really struck me.
Yeah, Rebekah and Hagar are two of the few in the Bible that God speaks directly to. Two of the women in the Bible that God speaks directly to. It's very unusual. For lifting that up. I blew right past that. Thank you. Okay, so Rebekah. So the whole nation is named after the child that she's about to favor. So it happened that Isaac was old, and his eyes too dim to see. He called Esau, his elder son, and said to him, my son. Esau said, here. He said to him, look, I've gotten old. I do not know the day of my death. And now, please take your tools, your bow and arrow, go out to the field. Catch game and make me a delicacy such as I love, and bring it to me, and I will eat it so my soul can bless you before I die. Rebekah was listening while Isaac spoke to Esau. Esau went to the field to hunt game to bring back. Rebekah said to Jacob, her son, look, I've heard your father speaking to your brother Esau. Bring me game and make me a delicacy, and I will bless you before Yahweh before I die. But now, my son Jacob, listen to me, to what I'm commanding, the mother commanding the son here. Go please to the flock and take 2 fine goats, and I will make them into delicacies for your father, such as he loves. And you will bring it to your father, and he will eat, so he will bless you before he dies. And the blessing is the giving of the inheritance, of the power of it. Jacob says to Rivkah, his mother, but Esau, my brother, is a hairy man. I am a smooth man. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I will be a liar in his eyes and bring a curse upon myself and not a blessing. His mother said to me, may your curse be upon me, my son. Just listen to me and go get it for me. And so literally, Rebekah gets a fleece and puts it on Jacob's arm. So when her husband Isaac goes to give the blessing of inheritance, they are both in fooling the old man. Because Rebekah has had a vision that Jacob is much better suited to be the next, patriarch, right? And so she engineers this. She chooses one son over another with intrigue in the moment of blessing at her husband's death. This is not insignificant. And this is why Farmer Kinski calls her the hand that rocks the cradle. The powerless know that trickery may save their lives. This is what she says on page 19. Early interpreters, both Jewish and Christian, praised Rivkah, as did medieval and Reformation writers. The censure did not begin until the end of the 19th century, when male biblical scholars began to condemn Rebekah as a Lady Macbeth. So for a lot of time, especially in Jewish thought, Rebekah is seen as a hero. And Jacob himself is branded a trickster, where really it's Rebekah who's the trickster. Jacob also was a trickster, but he's nothing like his mom. And Rebekah knows that, you know, she's done something significant and probably dangerous. She could have caused a whole lot of problems. And what you should know about the difference between Christianity in beginning in the late 19th century, the very first statement of biblical literalism did not occur until the 1880s. It occurred in the United States. I was in Chicago at a meeting of very right-wing biblical scholars who were terrified about some of the new science that was unlocking the Bible to those who wanted to really investigate it the way we would investigate any other ancient text. We were learning much more about the ancient languages. We were learning much more about ancient cultures. We were realizing that there were ways to read this between the lines and understand there's this editor and this part and this. After centuries of, as some have remarked, that, you know, Roman Catholicism didn't even encourage people to read the Bible until the 20th century. After centuries of treating biblical tales, often, not always, as metaphor, as story, as fable, it was in this country a great engine of extremist right-wing theology in the 1880s. This is the Chicago Statement of Inerrancy. Cover to cover, the whole Bible is literally true, as if possible.
Well,
and that undergirds the right-wing Protestant denominations to this day and some of the right-wing intergroups of Catholicism. Now, we have a Pope now who doesn't believe any of that nonsense, thank goodness. And actually,
right, yeah.
Rid of some of its worst doctrines, you know, including supersessionalism, which means that all the Christian versions of the Hebrew stories are the true ones. They've actually shredded that doctrine. Wow. They've shredded the doctrine of the lost Jew. They've done a lot of that. Catholicism is far advanced from right-wing evangelicalism as far as its understanding of theology. So here we go. Just going to end with the blessing that's supposed to go to Esau, but because of Rebekah,
right.
And remember, Jacob is the one, once he literally wrestles with God, his name is changed to Israel, and he's the one that the entire nation is named after.
Wow.
Many peoples will serve you. Many nations will submit to you. Be a magnet to your brothers. The sons of your mother will submit to you. Cursed are those who curse you, and blessed are those who bless you. And it's an oracle. And here we go. And of course, just to wrap this story up a little bit before we conclude tonight's session, Esau, understandably, is furious. And Jacob leaves for a while. He leaves and he begins to seek his own fortune. He seems to be remarkably good at acquiring wealth. And there's this beautiful scene when Jacob returns to Canaan to finally make amends with Esau. And he puts all of his animals first, and then his servants, and then his children, and then his wife, and then him. And he falls down on his knees. And Esau simply says, "Welcome home, my brother." There's a great sermon in there about forgiveness from Esau that most of us probably have a hard time understanding. But Esau in the end forgives him, but his mom sends him away because she's terrified that Esau's going to kill him.
How long? How long did he go?
It is a long time. It's like
decades.
It's at least a decade. I don't remember the exact number of years. So yeah.
He was probably just happy to see him.
At some point, you know, because they're both old men at that point.
Yeah.
They're both like, you know.
Right. And also Esau didn't do too badly himself.
Too bad either. That's exactly right.
Right.
The original prodigal son.
Yeah. 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 I hear you, man. That's so true. And the other thing that to remember is it's Jacob who becomes Israel. It's his 12 sons who become the 12 tribes of Israel. So I just want to tie all those details. I don't expect you guys to know all that stuff. I don't know it all, but I know I want to make sure that you know, you hear all these things, and this is where it's all right here. The reason it's the tribes of Israel is because of Rebekah. Yeah. Rebekah is, he said, you are the one that should get the blessing, not my other son.
When we first introduced each other, and I said one of the things that you know, to know about me is that I like to organize ideas into thematics. And one of the things I really love about this introduction, and just my own way in, is how she sets up the victors, right, virgins, voices, and victims, right? And then as a sociologist, thinking about how those archetypes, you know, I guess, right, are mapped onto you know, social order, right? So this is sort of a time in the history of the nation where, you know, and then Rebekah is, you know, sort of this archetype of power and control connected to, you know, where they are, right? And so anyway, for me, that was super, you know, it's been super interesting, you know, to sort of get into it that way. And I know there's other victors.
She does a great job. I feel like she does a great job of making this, the way she organizes and the way she writes. It's very, very easy to get into and grasp, I think. So I'm really pleased about that.
Cool. So we're going to wrap up. I advertised this class to end at 8:30. It's already 8:35. We will probably go a little over each night, but I don't mind sticking around. But for those who want it to end when I say, we will end it.
Okay.
And so if you have any questions or comments or preferences for how, you know, that I conduct this class, just please let me know. You know, I have pretty thick skin, so you can tell me in front of everyone too.
Please make sure I'm on the list.
What's that?
Please make sure I'm on the email list.
Yeah. We're going to help you with that. I think they help you sign around, because I think it's going into your spam, because it's telling us it's sending you those email messages. So I see Mary and Helen.
Oh, you found us. Okay.
Yeah. I'll make sure that you guys are on the list that I have. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
You know what, Reverend Scott, the one thing is that I've always felt sorry for Isaac. You know, I think who was the folk singer who said Abraham had an only son, Isaac, and he loved him very much. And they made a little cartoon out of that song, which is very beautiful and poignant. And I always felt sorry for Isaac. You know, he was put on the sacrificial altar. He was almost killed by his father, and then you have his wife betraying him not in some respects. Well, absolutely, she betrayed him, and I always found him to be almost like a tragic figure in this large biblical, very dysfunctional family, you know. And so I really just feel very sorry for Isaac.
He's not given many places to shine in Genesis. He's not, he's a pawn for God's game with Abraham. You know, he's a pawn for Rebekah's game with Jacob. Yeah, he's not, as a patriarch, he's not given a whole lot of glory.
Yeah.
Interesting.
As long as I base Joan, shut it up.
By who?
Base Joan.
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 Okay, cool. Yeah. All right.
Okay.
So we're gonna get through tonight. Thank you very much. Joe Baez. Joe Baez.
Joe Baez.
Oh, Joe Baez. Okay.
I didn't know that. I have to look that up.
Pete Singer. I thought it was Pete Singer who did it.
Well, they all sang songs, right?
They
So,
all
you know,
did sing
Right,
each other's songs,
right. But I think it was Pete Singer who actually wrote the song. Sung it, but there's also, she sings it and there's a cartoon, and it's just so poignant. It is just so poignant.
For us, Wendy.
Yeah.
So that's another little reminder. If there's something that you know, one of these stories that you identify with more, feel free to dig into it more and you know, ask me to co-lead that section or something. And you know, I don't need to be the only one talking here, and I'm not, but you know, but I realize that you know, I do have the training in biblical stuff, so and theology, so I understand that too. So next week, I will, let me pull this up so I can share the screen, and I will make sure that we get it to you all by email. I promise. So next week we will probably look at a little bit at these tales. All right, Saviors of the Exodus. That's a fun tale about how Moses actually survives in the Pharaoh's court and reminds us that it was all Rebekah, which is a great story, often overlooked from the book of Joshua. We'll encounter a little bit of Sarah, but she's also a huge figure, and you know, it seems that Primer Kinski wants us to look at some of the, you know, less large. And Rachel and Leah, who are the two wives of Jacob, who becomes Israel on his way back from getting married twice. And so that's what we'll do next week. And without further ado, I just want to thank you for being part of this class and being excited about these things, because, you know, I'm not afraid to show my excitement. Those of you taking my class before, and that'll happen a couple times, and I hope it's contagious. You know, to me, this text is you know, it's just an architect of our culture, and so, you know, it's confounded me since I was a little kid. You know, let me share this because you don't all know this story. So, you know, I grew up Southern Baptist. I talked a little bit about that in my sermon on Sunday.
Yes.
When I used to go to Sunday school, the teacher would often just proclaim things that the Bible meant, that the text itself didn't seem to make sense to me. And me being, well, me, I would say, I don't see it that way. Doesn't it mean that? Or could it mean this? You know, and where do you get that from? Well, after about, you know, 130 pesky questions over like a 3-month period when I was 13 years old, I was invited to stop coming to Sunday school. And instead to go sit with the adults up in the sanctuary. And you know, and I have to say, the Sunday school teacher wasn't mean. He was like, you're just a little more curious than most of these students, so maybe you'd be better off in the sanctuary. And I thought it was like, oh, I'll get this promotion,
right?
Promotion, that's right.
Was it good in the sanctuary?
And so I got to the sanctuary, and there was a holy harangue about burning in hell. And he used this as, you know, and I said, well, doesn't it say in Romans 5 that as in Adam we all shall die, but in Christ we all shall live? So I don't understand. Get this notion of hell. Isn't it just a metaphor? I didn't realize that I was a universalist at the time.
Yeah, right.
That all he did is look at me and say, how come you're not in Sunday school, boy? And I realized that from then on, I was going to sit in my buddy David Dropieski's basement and listen to Pink Floyd.
Right.
So there's a little more confession than maybe I should have shared. But there you go.
There you go.
At least you didn't get sent to your father.
And the preacher right here, right?
They're all true
and the
stories.
Electrician.
Right.
And the electrician.
I've had many lives. I can't only on like 5 or 6. Not on 7 or 8. That's right. Stop numbering them all. Thank you all. I'll see you next week.
Okay. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Next week in person. Next week in person.